program coordinator, but you're not here to see me or hear from me. We have an excellent panel and a timely discussion what's going on across our nation. So I'm not going to be too long-winded. I'm going to get right into it because I want to make sure that we get a chance to interact with our present audience as well as our Zoom audience. So let me just go over the format. So hopefully it makes sense to you, the format of the order. So to my far right, we have Dr. Clark, then we have Dr. Coakley, we have Professor Henderson, and last but certainly not least, my sword, Dr. Shelley Hope Jones. Make sure I get it right. Jones-Holt. Okay.
Yeah, my daddy would. Yeah,
I would appreciate it. I don't want your dad to get mad at me, or I don't want your husband to get mad at me. So I want to keep everything cool. So here's what we're gonna do, so that I don't mess anything up. My panel, or the panelists, they're gonna self-introduce themselves, and they're gonna answer the first question. They're gonna answer their perception of the current political economy within the educational context. So again, they're going to introduce themselves and answer the first question, which is their perception of the current political economy within the educational context. So we'll start off with Dr. Clark.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. First time for me in this area, and I've just been stunned by the beauty and just really thoroughly enjoyed spending the day out here. So thank you for having me. Dr. Adam Clark, I'm the superintendent of the Mount Diablo Unified School District, which is located in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's a school district with 29,000 students, 55 schools that cover over 7 different cities. The unique thing about Mount Diablo is those cities are very diverse, from our extremely wealthy areas to our extremely underserved and impoverished areas, and then everything in between. Prior to that, I've been a elementary school teacher, principal at all 3 levels in many different environments, and held district office positions in both student services and educational services. So I think that the question is very timely when it's asked what's sort of the political climate in the education world. You know, one thing about education is that when you are working with people's children, there is a level of emotion and commitment that comes with that, and it's very interesting because it's very difficult to bring about tremendous change and influence with young people without interacting with their families and with the communities at large. And so with our national political climate being what it is, and people don't agree, it's actually magnified in the school environment because you interject those precious young people, which are people's, regardless of background, their kids are their biggest joy and biggest responsibility and their biggest priority. And at schools, as you're trying to shape their educational experience, it can become very, very political. So in a job like mine, I have to make sure that I really am looking out for the best interests of all kids from all backgrounds with all aspirations, and that takes a lot of juggling. So hopefully to get deeper into it, but that's kind of on the surface level of that political climate that we're dealing with. But again, finances, who's getting what resources is a big political issue when it comes down to what kids are being taught and by who and what sort of background are the people who are teaching kids play into how that instruction is delivered. And then of course you have just the race and gender issues that we're grappling with as a society, and then just how we're all coming out of the pandemic. So the schools are an interesting place right now, but they are still probably one of the most vibrant and most just energetic places to be when you can shape the hearts and minds of our young people.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. Dr. Coakley, same question.
All right. Dr. Paul Coakley,
I'm the superintendent of Multnomah Education Service District in Portland, Oregon, right there by the airport. We serve all 8 component districts, including Portland Public, Gresham Barlow, David Douglas, Centennial, Reynolds, Park Rose, Corbett, and Riverdale. And so we provide supports for those districts. And the way I think of an educational service district is we are the backbone institution for what districts can't provide. So every district has a limited amount of funds. And when I think about the political context, that's one of the biggest issues is funding. And every year in Oregon, we have to advocate for our students so we can have the funds that they need. And each year, for the past 4, 5 to 6 years, we've been providing education at a current service level, which means just what we've done previous, we're getting those funds so we can kind of continue what we're doing. But also I think that the current service level is inaccurate because we also bargain with teachers. And then we try to provide what our teachers need. We try to value their work through compensation. And when we do that, the current service level actually drops because we're paying people out of that current service level. So what I would like for states to do is provide education at the quality education model, which is where the level of funding is if we actually want to increase student outcomes. And we haven't been doing that in Oregon and across the nation, but really in Oregon, our funding level is a big issue. And so another thing about me is I come from a long line of educators. My dad was a retired principal in Portland Public Schools, Harriet Tubman Middle School, and Roosevelt High School. And then my mom was a kindergarten teacher for 30 years. And so I moved from Tennessee to Oregon, and just growing up in Oregon, a K-12 system, and having 2 educator parents, that led me to a pathway of being a teacher, then a principal, assistant superintendent, HR director, and a superintendent. And so that's a little bit about me. To the first question, I think funding is one of the biggest issues, but then there's also a lot of other political issues that come with the superintendent job as well. One is working with school boards. And for me, I'm blessed to have a supportive school board. It's a diverse school board. It's the board that hired me. But every time there's an election cycle, our board members get people who want to oppose the work we're doing that run against our board members. So we have some really conservative people running against our school board because we're doing a lot of work around racial equity and trying to make sure that every student gets a quality education. And I think there's people especially that are opposed to the racial equity work and opposed to the focus of our district in general. And so the best way for them to change that is by targeting the school board, going after the superintendent, flipping their job. And so in Oregon, our diversity among superintendents is really low. It's like 1%. I've been the only black male superintendent in Oregon for the past 8 years. And that's for a specific reason. And the reason is because it's really difficult to be a leader of color in Oregon. And you really have to know how to navigate white spaces. And I've been pretty transparent about saying that because my entire life I've navigated white spaces because I grew up in Oregon from K-12. And then I went to U of O and I transferred to Portland State and I graduated from Portland State. So I know we'll get into more stuff deeper and I'll let the next people go. That's a little bit about myself and the question 1.
And he's an author as well. This is my copy. You got to get your own. So thank you for that, Dr. Coakley. Professor Henderson.
Okay, I would say good evening to all of you. My name is Professor Silvester Henderson. I think I'm the old man in the room. I've been around a long time. I've had a wonderful career in that most of my information has come from the commission in California, the master plan for California. I've worked in every level of education in the California master plan through higher education. I worked for 13 years for the San Francisco State University, 20 years for the University of California at Berkeley, and 31 and a half years for the California Community College system. So I understand some of the challenges as it relates to all the different ways that the education is supposed to work for students. I graduated years ago when probably long older than this young man is. I graduated years ago, and I hear a lot of concern about education and funding, and I do agree that funding in areas such as that are very critical. However, for me, because I've worked in every level of education in terms of faculty, I had the wonderful pleasure of working in administration for a couple of years. In addition to that, I worked as part of a council called the Academic Center for California Community Colleges. We were the 14 faculty members that created all the professional and curricular strategies for over close to 4 million students, and we represented 70,000 professors, of which around, I think, 35 or 40,000 were full-time. So we were the major source that talked to legislation for every one of the community colleges, every one of the 117 California community colleges and 76 districts. So I've had an opportunity to interface and connect with educators all around. In addition to being a graduate of San Francisco State, working there in my earlier years when I first started teaching many years ago, I kind of learned how to teach and I kind of learned the art of teaching primarily just from doing it. Education was completely different back in 1977. It was viewed differently. Everything was completely different at that time. I think it was harder, and I think that I don't want to say we were smarter, but I think we did not have as many resources readily available to us. So we had to work a lot harder in a different way to learn and do things. And that became a benefit. When I look in terms of what is the political context for higher education, I look at it as an opportunity. I think that funding is an issue, but as a 64-year-old man, basically, every single school year for the last 40 years I've been working and teaching, funding has been an issue. Funding is always going to be an issue in colleges. It's never going to go away. I think one of the largest concerns happens is how do faculty members work with students? How are you able to create a flexible curriculum that meets some of the current political differences that we have in the world? Whoever becomes the leader of the government is really who pretty much determines, in many respects, how faculty professionals view how they approach learning in the classroom. So I see that one of the most critical issues in education to me is curriculum and instruction.
Okay, thank you, Professor Henderson. Okay, and last but not least, okay.
Here I go. So my name is Dr. Shelley Jones-Holt, and believe it or not, he really did teach all those years, because this here is actually my professor from UC Berkeley.
Isn't that, and she's wonderful.
But I see, so I'll tell you what I see, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my background, because it's going to make sense when you see, when you understand my background, to understand how I see education. Right now, I see this time as a time of immense, dangerous opportunity. And when I say dangerous opportunity, especially for those of us who are sitting here and look the way we do, because we know that education has not served the most marginalized populations. We all know the list of the names and colors and identities of the people that have not survived or thrived, if you will, in the educational system. But right now, based on, even though the political context is one that's a little tumultuous, We have a time of dangerous opportunity on the back of COVID, on the back of a racial uprising, on the backs of us all as an entire nation, an entire world realizing the importance of family, understanding that education can occur anywhere. That was something that before 5 years ago, we didn't think that education could actually happen on a computer, right? Now the whole world went into educating on computers. So we have a time of what I consider dangerous opportunity. And the reason I say that it's dangerous is because if we do not approach this work in exactly the right way, based on the identity and the position that you sit in, you can waste this opportunity.
That's right.
Right? If your ego gets in the way, if your pride gets in the way, if you move too fast, if you go too slow, all of these different mechanisms can get in the way of what we're talking about. Now, I will not besmirch the fact resources are definitely an issue in the field of education. But like Professor Henderson said, they've always been an issue. What we now have in our political climate is we know that race is at the forefront of what we were talking about, and behind that, all of the different factions of identity of who we are and how we authentically show up as whole people. Now we're all having to consider that, and with that comes a whole host of problems that the system is not ready to deal with. Right? It's not ready to tackle, okay, wait a minute, I got gender identity, I got pronouns, I've got religious differences, I've got all of these different types of people that I now need to consider that the educational system never really had to consider before, right? We got to go back and realize that No Child Left Behind, and I use air quotes for that, was literally in 2000. Okay, we're not even 25 years into the idea of actually being accountable for every child's education. That is not even a quarter of a century old. And now we're in a place where not only do you need to consider every child, you need to consider their identity, you need to consider where they come from, you need to consider, and then here goes the laundry list of things. And so we have an opportunity right now in the educational system amidst all these politics that if we handle it just right, we can really set the stage for the next 25, 50, 100 years of what the educational system is going to look like. But if we mishandle this opportunity right now, we run the risk of it going back to what we consider normal. And for those of us, for me, I'll say that is absolutely, positively a complete an idea that can't happen. Let's just say that can't happen, right? And so, just to tell you a little bit about my background, I went to college at UC Berkeley. That was my undergrad, and then I was actually on my way to medical school, and I stopped by a table and was able to now become a teacher. Like they said, hey, we'll pay some of your student loans if you become a teacher. Well, for someone like me, I was like, what? You gonna pay me to teach and pay off some of my student loans? Oh yes, I'm definitely signing up for that, right? And so I got my first job teaching at American Indian Charter in Oakland, if you haven't heard of it. And so I was one of the two teachers that Ben Chavis hired right out of college. We didn't know our behinds were bullet wounds, honey. We didn't know anything. What we were was smart. And that was his focus. He's like, you're smart and you know how to learn. If you're smart and you know how to learn, you can figure out how to teach. And that's really how I've run my career, is that if you understand your content, you understand your material. I was a psychology and biology with a minor in business, so I understood math and science. He was looking for a math and science person. I'm like, okay, great. A few years later, and literally a few years later, I was asked to become an assistant principal because they needed a black woman who spoke Spanish to now come and clean up some of the mess that was happening with some of the gang riots in some of the areas. Just being totally transparent. So I was like, all right, I'll stay a couple more years in this education thing, and then I'm going to be a real doctor. Like, medical doctor, even though I can't stand the sight of spit, but that's a whole other conversation, right? And so, needless to say, I progressed through the system because I believe that the education system needs to focus on the people in the system. The learning will happen, but if you focus on the people and their needs, that is when actual, authentic, high-level learning is going to occur. Right. And so because I was one of those folks that focused on the people, and I was like, I'll bring you the knowledge. I got that part. But I need you to feel comfortable. I need you to be able to be yourself. I need you to be able to tell me what you're thinking, like open up your brain, and no one's going to do that if they feel uncomfortable, if they feel unsafe, if they feel like they're not being heard, or they feel like they're not welcomed, right? And so that philosophy brought me up through the ranks to become an executive director, and then superintendent of the 14th largest district in the state of Michigan. And after a couple of years in the superintendency, no disrespect to my gentlemen here that are in it, but my passion is always going to be with working with people and teaching and leading and supporting. And I realized that, hey, you know what great superintendents need? You know what great leadership teams need? Someone to coach and mentor them and think with them. And I am, one of my gifts is in being a thought partner. I tell it like it is. I tell it straight. I've always been that kind of a person that, as folks would say, Shelley, you can go into a room and say things that no one else can say. I'm like, exactly, so don't try it. Don't try to be me. You'll end up on that appointment. Like, don't do that. But now I have started a company where I actually support amazing superintendents who are wanting to do work that is sometimes considered edgy or racialized or whatever word you want to call it, but to do it in a way that doesn't bring shame, blame, victimization, or harm. And doing this work is really possible, but it's not always possible in that seat. You have to come out of that seat. So I came out of that seat, and now I work as a consultant supporting superintendents with executive leadership development, courageous leadership development, and focusing on making the changes that need to happen for our school systems to work.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. All right, so
that was for all of us, just so you know.
We're going to stay with Dr. Holt. That was so nice. We want to hear you twice.
Here we go.
So, your second question. So, now that we know what you do, what is the starting point school districts can take to improve the educational climate for students via an improved administrative equity lens?
Oh, do I have some suggestions for it all. So, first of all, when people think about the school district and the work that they can do, oftentimes we want to focus on the wrong people first. So what I often hear is, when we need to do something to fix the kids. Well, the kids are going to show up in their best kid way that they are going. Like, you're not going to fix kids. I hate to break it to folks that really believe that the educational system is meant to fix kids, but kids are going to show up in whatever way they are. So the next place that people go is, oh, well, it has to be something with the teachers. We need to do something with the teachers, right, Professor Edson? We just had a whole debate around this.
That's debatable.
Right? And I would argue, no. So if you want to know where to start, I'm going to say, do not start with the children. Leave the children alone. Especially right now, leave the teachers alone, because they're all trying to come back and heal from being out of school for 2 years, getting to know each other, getting back into the ranks. Where we need to start is with leadership and those who make the decisions about where the money goes. So we need to start with the leadership of our state. We need to start with, well, I would say the country, but that money, we're not going to do that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. Not today. Tomorrow don't look good either. Right? But we need to start at least at the state level, and then proceed at the Board of Education level, to the superintendent and cabinet, and then working with our district and site leaders to shift their mindsets about what education should look like and how we approach this work. And so in doing this work, what I often suggest is that you have to start with building safe space for brave action, which is what Dr. Tyrone Howard speaks of. Remember, we said we cannot do this work if everybody's afraid of each other. If they're afraid they're going to get canceled or consequenced, which is the worst thing that could have happened to our educational system. I get that people need to be held accountable, but imagine trying to learn to ride a bike, and every time you fall off, someone beats you.
Right.
Every single time. And then so now you're scraped and bloody from the floor, and then someone has come and, hit you upside the head a few times and said, okay, yeah, go back on that bike. How willing are you going to be to jump back on that bike? Probably not as much. But imagine you fell off that bike and someone says, you know what? Falling off the bike is going to happen. You got to get back up. You got to get back on it. I will walk with you. I will come side by side with you. I'm not going to yell and scream at you or get you, or you're not going to be in trouble, but we are going to learn from what we just did. Now I might be more willing. Doing this work in our schools and shifting the mindsets and taking advantage of these opportunities works much the same way. We have to normalize learning together as adults about different cultures. Many of us have learned and to accept the biases that we have about people as fact. And then we get in our feelings about those biases, and when we think those feelings are facts, right? Feelings aren't facts, and biases are a problem for all of us, because we all have them. And so in order to address some of the biases that we've grown up with, we got to talk about it. We've got to talk about how we grew up and things like that. And then I'm not going to go through all of these because I can't. I'll give you two more. One is to be absolutely clear in this state right now about what your expectations are. There are so many folks that walk around with these lofty ideas and say, oh, we want everyone to be kind. If I were to ask everybody in this room what does kind mean, I would get 30 different definitions of what kind means. So for you, kind might be looking you in the eye and talking to you very respectfully. For you, you might say, well, no, I don't want you to look at me in the eye. I want you to look somewhere else. And, I don't want you to speak to me in that way. Because we all are different people. And so in learning together about one another and about how we were raised and what our likes and dislikes are, all that stuff that we were told was professional and we didn't need to talk about in a professional environment, we actually learn how to work together and how to work together more effectively and more efficiently, right? And now in this time when people are literally choosing their jobs based on how they feel at work. No one wants to work anywhere where they're gonna feel like crap. And guess what? Our educational systems have really made people feel not too good, right? And so we have to create cultures in our schools and in our workplaces where people would want to be, and then children will eventually thrive, right? Last thing I'll say is that we have to learn how to fight. And so what I mean by that is we need to learn how to have differences of opinion, how to have conflict, how, going back in the day, remember when you could disagree with somebody and it was just that? Like we just had differences of opinion. It wasn't now the whole world is coming to an end. We need to learn how to have conflict and how to restore our community after those conflicts so that we can continue to work together. And so when we talk about where to start, I'm always going to say create safe space for brave action. Start with the adults and let us adults figure out how to get along with each other and do this work correctly, and the children will follow right behind us. I promise you they will.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Holt, for that. So coming back down to Professor Henderson, your question definitely is applicable to our current situation in place and institution. With the rapid decline of DEI positions all over the nation, in particular within higher education, how can community college leadership ensure that equity is integral for positive student, social, and academic experience?
Thank you for the question. I thought about this clearly. I think first of all, it's not focusing on the language, because what has happened in higher education especially is that there's so much emphasis on words that people don't look at the ingredients of whatever they're trying to sell. And so not focusing on the language, because you can create an equitable context within a classroom not using the word equity. You don't have to use the word equity in order to promote equity. You can use intellectual equity or intellectual fairness. You can take the word equality, which you figure is a red principle, in a sense. And you could take another word that may be a blue principle, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. You can take those two words, but you can create a bridge to help the student that needs to cross the bridge without telling the student that. And to me, that is the key of really instruction and teaching. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion, to me, I think there's too much emphasis in the words. Even in the red states now where the governor has rejected many of the programs, I get the fact that governmental officials have their own beliefs and their lack of beliefs, and you have one area that's conservative and one area that's liberal, but that has nothing to do with how the teacher is able to use a flexible curriculum and understand to teach the students. Because you can teach the students regardless in such a way, not focusing on language, but focusing on the ingredients of what you're teaching, which actually answers the principle of equity. Because equity meaning the bridge. So to me, how do you deal with the climate? It is by helping educators to become less concerned about the words and more concerned about the content of what they're teaching and the strategies that they use for learning. During my many years of teaching so many different students, I had an experience that was very profound. Now, someone would say, why would a person who was deaf sign up for a singing class? Now, and when the student first came to me, I never forget this, I did everything I could. I was wrong. I did everything I could to try to encourage that student to drop the class because the student couldn't hear. And then the student went into the dean, and the dean and I talked about it. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, Silvester, you're not thinking about this right. The whole purpose of education is the experience. So instead of me having the student to sing, I made an alternative for the student, and I had the student to do the same thing everyone else was doing it, but it was through sign language and through speech. So I gave the student the same experience that the student would have had they been able to match pitch. And I learned a lot from that. That it wasn't about me having a student that came in with everything all together. My job as a professor was to figure out a way to give the student a bridge into learning. My obligation was not to castrate the student for a disability they didn't ask for. And so to me, when you say about diversity, equity, and inclusion, to me it all rests in one of the areas that it rests is within the classroom. It rests with the faculty. It rests with how the faculty is going to implement their learning for the students. It also rests with student support services. Because very often in college campuses, many professionals, even the people who are in the areas, they don't really understand the difference between student support services and academics. Student support services that offer counseling, financial aid, tutoring. Academics that's teaching you a subject area. You know, understanding how to integrate so that one starts with a support base, but the other is delivering the actual nuts and bolts of the subject area that the student is teaching. So to me, diversity and equity, even though it is equal, it is very, very important. It is more important to me to have fairness in all that you do. And it's important to recognize, I want to use the word, an intellectual capacity of equality. An intellectual capacity of equality that teaches everyone regardless of who they are, black, white. I have transgender students that's come to me all the time. I had a young man who was a transgender student. I've had students in my choir who were females who they wanted to have different experiences in terms of their performance outcome, and I've had to find effective ways. And I'm not going to say that it was difficult for me. It wasn't difficult, I should say. Originally, one of the things that COVID taught me was that I had to rechange my thinking because I was a 100% traditionalist. I was a 100%, Dr. Shelley can tell you.
For sure.
I was a 100% traditionalist. And then I had to learn that education and learning comes in various mediums. It comes not only in the spoken language, but it also comes with touch. It also comes with what you see. It also comes with what you write. It also comes in the form of understanding that when you're working with students, some students are afraid to speak up in the classroom environment. However, they will be more comfortable in an asynchronous environment, because they can ask the question void of not feeling sure about how the professor to respond. So to me, DEI is important, but what's more important to me is intellectual fairness. And so the current climate that is here now, I think once again, I want to go back to what Dr. Shelley was saying, it's just an opportunity for faculty professionals especially to be able to understand how to become innovative and to really meet the needs of the students. Don't make the mistake that I made with the student who was deaf. That really taught me a lot. That experience taught me a lot, because I'm telling you, for the first 2 weeks, the student drove me crazy. I did everything I could to try to convince this student. And then I'm grateful because the student made me a better educator. It was because of the student I became more competent as an educator. As a result of that, I started teaching courses, primarily music history courses, just to students who had learning challenges. And I started learning a whole lot more. And then I realized, wow, it was because of the student's stubbornness that I became better as a professor. And I think is oftentimes what happens in many of our, especially instructional spaces, students are afraid to speak to their professors, but I always tell them, feel free to. The professors, sometimes you have to educate the professor. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to remind the professor, I don't understand what you're saying. How does this relate to me? And work with the teacher, because teachers a lot of times, they know, but then they're still narrow many times in what they know. We all are narrow in what we know, based on our own experiences. So to go back to DEI is very critical. It has varying perspectives, but someone told me recently, I was saying, wow, it just seems as though within the context of higher education, everybody's always complaining about something. And this wonderful chancellor said, well, when people complain, they're really not complaining, they're just sharing their ideas. And I have learned to listen to other people, including Dr. Shelley.
Thank you,
Recently.
Professor Henderson mentioned a lot about students, and I just want to acknowledge we have several students here. Appreciate you all for coming out. Some of my mentees, a lot of good brothers here. Thank you for coming out. Some of my colleagues and everybody, thank you. So let's keep it moving, because it's not about me, it's about this awesome panel. So, Dr. Coakley, as the only black male superintendent in Oregon, how do you navigate, so you talked about this earlier, now we're getting into a little bit more, how do you navigate the intersectionality of leadership, race, and gender while leading an educational service district that is not very racially diverse?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so for me, I grew up around a lot of school leaders, mostly people of color, my parents' friends, and that's who I sort of modeled after. And then just learning to be yourself is one of the biggest things in navigating any space, is making sure that you're comfortable with who you are, knowing what your values are, and then making sure that your values as an educator are always driven by what's best for students. And so to me, I'm pretty transparent, and so I just go about building relationships. And one of the things that you talked about is working with people. And so at the ESD, this is my third year, but the first year, what I told the staff my goal is to just get out to the schools, get out to the programs, really learn about the work that's happening within the district, and get to know people and figure out what's working well. And then through that, once you know the organization that you're serving, then people are more open to hearing more critical feedback about things that aren't going well. But one of the things that I think leaders make a mistake on when they first take over an organization is many people come in and then they start making changes right away, and they don't value or give appreciation to the people who are doing the hard work every day. And so I think to build relationships, you really have to make sure that you value people and you share the appreciations, and then build relationships. And when you have those relationships, then people are going to listen to you because they know that you understand the work they're doing, you value it, and you care about it. And then that you are trying to be there as a support to help everybody improve. So that was my year one goal. And another thing that I try to do is listen more and talk less. We got 2 ears, we got 1 mouth for a reason. And so really going into those spaces and hearing what people's needs are, and then trying to think about them, brainstorm with people, and then each district, each school, each program is different and their needs are different. So working with those leaders and now staffs for what their needs are specifically has been some of my strategies for that. And then also we have a goal for a strategic plan that we created, which is called the Blueprint 28. And the reason I call it the Blueprint is because I'm a big hip hop fan, and so Jay-Z had the Blueprint.
Yes.
KRS-One had the Blueprint.
Yes.
But so KRS-One, for those who are hip hop fans, are like way back when it started.
Yeah.
Taking a back.
Yeah. So his Blueprint, when Jay-Z came out with an album called The Blueprint, I was in high school. And I was like, why would he bite off that album and name it The Blueprint? And then I started to think it was because it was 2 different eras. So KRS-One was coming up in the 80s. His era of hip hop, he created a blueprint for what hip hop should have been in the 80s.
That's right.
And then Jay-Z created a blueprint for what it should have been in the 90s. And what I told my teachers is we're not dropping an album, we're showing a blueprint for what school districts should be doing and what they should be focused on currently after the pandemic. I think the pandemic changed the way that not only we look at education, but the way we serve students, and it also let us know other things were possible. Everything was really traditional, and then everyone was pushed into a situation where you gotta educate students. They need us right now. How do we get food to them? How do we get Chromebooks to them? How do we get Wi-Fi to them? How do we educate them in the spaces that they're in so they have safety? And then we saw all these creative ways of doing it. And I think it pushed us to say, instead of what we can do, we started thinking about what we want to do. But not only what we want to do, but we can also do it. We just don't know how to do it yet. So then we really started having the conversation around how do we do that? And we changed the way that we do that. And so for me, I just think that we need those creative people who are going to think outside of the box. And we also need people that are really connected to students. And it's important to make sure that every organization, every student has an adult that they trust.
That's right.
That they can connect to and that they can relate to. And so we have to get the right people on the bus. So one of our goals is to diversify the workforce. Our workforce, our school district, we want it to reflect the students we serve. So our staff should be the same percentages as the student population we serve, and our student population is really diverse. So we've had to change our hiring practices. We've had to change the way we recruit. We've had to change the questions that we ask people. We have to change the way that we advertise as a district. We also had to change our values, our why, our mission statement, to make it more interesting for people who may not have thought that might be a path that they want to do. And then we started to really begin with the leaders. One of the ways that you get more diverse teachers in classified staff is hire more diverse leaders. Because then they're going to feel like, oh, there's a connection there. You know, I didn't know he worked there, so I think I'm going to try it out. And so we started to get more diversity in the leadership first. And now every year we've become about 5% more diverse. Even though it's really slow, we're starting to see a change and a shift, and we're also there to support people. So instead of trying to evaluate people and say, yes, you're doing a good job, no, you're not doing a good job, we're trying to meet them where they are and say, what can we do to make sure you're successful in this role?
All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Coakley. And just, man, the only brother superintendent, and you know the state is not diverse, but I'm like, wow, that's just for those who are aspiring to be superintendents, whether you know young sister or brother and everything. We have a former, and we got 2 current ones right here. So definitely tune in because this is a great opportunity for you to learn. So Dr. Clark, he didn't mention that he's the incoming president of CASA too, but I'll let him speak to that, which is a big deal. So your question is, how do you create a supportive climate for Black students when only about 3% of the students in the huge district of Mount Diablo are Black? And what are the ways in which you allocate and justify the funding for those services?
Well, that's a simple question.
I think you can handle it.
Well, first of all, I just want to, the students in the room were acknowledged earlier, and I just want to again acknowledge that and praise them for,
That's right.
Taking advantage of this opportunity. Whenever I was a student somewhere and it was always coming towards an end, I always regretted not taking advantage of the talks, of going to plays, of doing extra things, and so just to see young people in the room is a great thing. So and I also want to acknowledge Dr. Coakley. I've never met him before, but hearing his answers, it's almost identical to what I would say in many of these things. So that tells me he's a good one, and same with myself. So and it's also interesting. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. This great diverse melting pot. But I've been the first many times in my role. Whether it's the first African American principal or first African American administrator or first male African American in a certain seat and whatnot, and so those things are still happening, not just in Oregon, but also in the Bay Area where it is very diverse. Well, so we have an interesting situation in Mount Diablo. I shared earlier 29,000 students. 3% of those students are African American, and historically, there's been challenges there, mainly in the area of disproportionality. So disproportionality is when you have numbers from a certain population, and they their presence outperforms other groups that have more numbers. And so for our African American students, we suspend them at a higher rate. Their absence level is higher than other students. The academic performance is lower than other students, and they just they only make up 3% of the population. So as for the last 4 years that I've been there, I've made sure to apply a large amount of resources and efforts to changing that narrative. Now, it doesn't mean that that I'm still not providing support and resources to other groups, but what we've done with our African American students is we've been real intentional with calling out our actions. So I don't have to worry about any group doing an expose or uncovering that we've been doing work for our African American students, because we tell everybody what we're doing. And we started off with coming up with a plan of how we were going to provide root cause resources. Oftentimes in school districts or in large organizations, when they have challenges or issues or data that's not favorable, we try to apply an old solution to a very complex problem. So we recycle plans. We recycle these disproportionality plans of how we're going to get out of disproportionality, and we just different date, different time, different signatures, but it's just checking a box. And this time we decided to really get down to the root cause. So it started with what my man said here is stop talking and listening. I went out on several different listening sessions to our African American families. I sent them all a personal email. I said, I'm the superintendent. I want to meet with you. I want to hear about what's working for your child in this district and what's not working for this child. And I showed up to that meeting by myself, no staff, and I always joke, no security. I just came and just listened. And there was a large group, and it went on for 2 hours of just hearing stories of people's experiences with schools. And they went through like generations. So it wasn't just like, this would happen to my kid last week. They were like, my son who's 18 now, when he was 5 years old and he showed up in this district, this is what happened to him or her or whatnot. And the stories were heartbreaking. And but I wasn't surprised by any of the stories that I heard. But giving this community the direct access to me and letting them share their stories and be affirmed. I wasn't there to give excuses. I wasn't there to pass blame. I wasn't there to say, oh, well, that just happened at this school, but that won't happen at this other school. Like everyone had these experiences they were sharing. So it started off with a 2-hour meeting and then an hour meeting in the parking lot. And so then I did it a second time. It was the same type of environment. Parents coming from different backgrounds, but parents of African American kids, and they shared these experiences of not being treated fairly, and whether it was microaggressions or whether it was flat out racism or low expectations or just whatever it was, like they had these heartbreaking stories about this. So then that informed our plan. So as we came up with the plan, we addressed the community and parent piece of it. So we have a person who their job is to engage with our African American families, to number one, inform them of what's going on in the district and really provide that. Number two, to celebrate the accomplishments of their children and to let them know that their children are valued and are special within our district. But then number three, to empower them to navigate our educational system. Then part of our plan came with the educational component of someone who could work with teachers about their pedagogy and the curriculum that they're using in the classroom and those direct experiences of these are taking place in the class and helping our students see themselves in the curriculum, help our students, being able to voice their opinions in class instead of being, shushed or disciplined or things of that nature. Then we took on the social emotional aspect of it. Many of our students coming from the pandemic or even 20 years before the pandemic dealt with trauma. And when you do an ACEs checklist on a young person and you're looking at kids who come from families who are divorced, someone who had to worry about rent or a meal or jobs or things like that, all those play into trauma. Then when you take like violence and just those horrific things that unfortunately happen to some of our young people, so many of our young people deal with trauma and it gets masked in other ways. So we had to get to that. So when you take those components of the community and then the teaching and then the social emotional and you kind of put that all together in our African American Student Achievement Program, you start to see results. It doesn't mean that it was easy. It doesn't mean that we didn't get challenged by folks who you would think that we wouldn't get challenged. Mainly our teachers union really challenged us on this effort. And even though we had agreements, and even though we paid them extra, and even though we, tried to work all these things out, a fear sometimes of the unknown. And I think, we talked about that a little bit. When you're not used to engaging with communities that are different than your own, and you're not, kind of brought up in that situation, and you really have to work hard at it. That's something for people to get over. And so, yeah, I get frustrated with that. I get a little bit, perturbed at times, but politically, I have to work through it. And so, we've done some good things. We're having those conversations about our students. We are able to celebrate Black excellence. We're able to have a room that has Black heroes on the wall and people who've contributed great things, and we're able to teach some of those values to our young people, but also providing a space where our students can just be themselves and be Black, right? And we do the same thing for our Latino students. We do the same thing for the science club. We do the same thing, but when you create those spaces for African American kids or for Black kids, you are going to get pushback because there is, we're in a country where, believe it or not, there's anti-Blackness. And so as we work through that, we just have to make sure that all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed and we're doing things the right way. all of our programs are inclusive to others, and so we make sure that we do invite others into our spaces. I'm very transparent with it all, so we put it on videos and we post it and we put it out there, and we call it out. And we may not see all of the academic gains that we may want. Like, we can't tackle chronic absenteeism or things like that overnight. It's going to take a while, but we're working towards it. And our kids feel heard, feel seen, feel valued. And I'm in this business only for kids, only for young people. So it's a start. But you can go to the Mount Diablo Unified School District website to see or follow our social medias to see some of the things that we're doing. But definitely our young people are worth it, and we got lots of efforts taking place to support them and give them every opportunity to be successful.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Clark. So I just want to take the liberty. I see my brother from another mother, Dr. Francis, who's doing great things. He's on our Zoom, doing great things in Mount Diablo, the Black Cultural room that Dr. Clark references. That's my brother's doing great work with families and just doing great work. So just want to shout him out in our Zoom audience. So with that, I want to go to Dr. Holt, because I gave you all the easy questions, huh? So, in this current political environment, have you experienced any additional barriers when training district officials, leaders, administrators? If you have, please convey how you overcame them. If not, hypothetically explain how you will circumvent those possible barriers.
All right, I'm gonna try to do this relatively quickly, but yes, of course. So my work I put it under the umbrella, if you will, of courageous leadership development, mainly because of what Professor Henderson spoke of when we come right out and say we're doing anti-racism work, we're doing diversity, equity, inclusion, any of the buzz terms. What we don't want to do is have language get in the way of what people need in their experience. And so I decided in starting my business, I'm not going to even get into that debate. We'll define the terms once we get into the course. What I focus on is courageous leadership. That's the first thing. Sometimes we have to get out of our own way when we are trying to do work. And so me coming and being, I would say I was born in Southern California, but I have to say I was raised in Northern, right? Because I went to Berkeley, I got, I was in Oakland, when they were talking about the Ebonics debates and those teachers that were protesting at the district office, that little short one in front, that was me. Right? And, it's because, I believe so deeply, but one of the biggest barriers that we have, first of all, is ourselves. Sometimes we get so indignant and so bent about the work we're doing, right? Oh, I believe in this, and it's for the kids, and that we end up doing things that are going to turn off the very people who need us most. And so the first barrier I would say is get out of your own way and think about yourself, your leadership, and where you sit. What are some of your triggers? What are some of the things that get under your skin? And learn how to manage those. There are things that people say in my trainings that literally make my skin crawl. Nobody would know it. Because it's not their business to know what I think. It's my business to pull out what they think. And so get out of your own way is my first and I know you're thinking, my goodness, you're thinking about everybody else being a barrier. No. You are probably the biggest barrier because you believe in this. Many of us are here because we've experienced this. We know this is real, right? And we want to see it changed yesterday. Well, it didn't start yesterday, so it's not going to get changed yesterday. And newsflash, it may not happen in our lifetime. We may not live, Martin Luther King didn't live to see it. We may not live to see the end result, but we are definitely trudging a path forward. The second largest barrier I see is a lack of clarity about who you serve. A lot of the folks that I work with, it's the upper level district leadership. So I'm working with superintendents, cabinets, I'm working with boards, I'm working with the principals. And one of the first questions that I ask them, sometimes that, to their own chagrin, is who do you serve? And what do you think most of them say?
Jesus.
I love it. I love you for that answer. Yes. But they don't say that, but maybe, just maybe. But who do you think they say they serve?
All the kids.
Kids. We serve the kids. And so then I proceed to ask, okay, so tell me, what time does your class start? When's the last time you actually taught a kid? And crickets, it's like, well, hold on. I get that you serve children. We all are in this business to serve children. I get that. But who you actually serve are the people that report to you. You are their support system. You are the person that they come to, not just for an evaluation, for understanding, for thought partnering, for making sure that they're going in the right direction. So technically, you serve the people who are next to you, and they serve the people who are next to them, and so on and so forth, to where we get to the educator, the teacher in the classroom, who actually is providing direct services to children, right? But we have a lot of folks in our system who have done some horrible things to adults in the name of serving children. And we know that hurt people. So how are you going to go and get upset or whatever it is with this person who, whatever they did, and I've seen all kinds of things. You're talking to someone who's investigated some of the most horrific things that have happened. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about maybe someone didn't turn in their paperwork on time, or you had to have a conversation with them, but they may not have done it in a way that's very respectful or affirming. So now that person is now going to go, and what do you think they're going to do? Right? And if that person is an educator, next thing you know, now the children are having bad experiences and we don't know what happened. Yeah, well, what happened is their teacher didn't feel appreciated and uplifted, and their principal didn't feel appreciated and uplifted and educated, and go all the way up the organization. And so one of the first things that's a huge barrier is clarifying for people who you serve and what serving that person looks like. And if you are doing harm to adults and mistreating adults in the name of serving children, you have just made yourself part of the problem of our educational system. Because hurt people hurt people. And the higher up we go in the organization, I guarantee you, if I have kids that aren't learning and are upset, if I travel up the organization, I'm going to find adults that are not productive and are upset, right? And so if we want to change things in the educational system, one of the biggest barriers to this work is people who are already fearful, or they're already in positions where they don't feel safe, or they don't feel like their manager understands them, and now they're expected to do something different. Another big barrier I've seen is this blanket approach to leadership. Leadership is leadership. Management is management. Education is education. Hogwash. It's not, right? There are in order for me to lead you, I have to know who you are. I have to know what drives you, what motivates you, what you're good at, what you may not be too good at. And it may be very different from leading you, sir, and what you're good at and what your expectations and your aspirations are. And so leadership and management is not just leadership. It's not just, I'm doing my job. It is about the people that you serve. And this blanket approach to leadership is a huge barrier to the equity that we're seeking for the children. We have to lead the people that are in front of us. That means you're going to have to learn them. You're going to have to understand them. And you're going to have to serve them. And many times in our educational system and in most hierarchical situations, people believe they're serving up. And that is exactly not the right way. One of my biggest frustrations as superintendent was when I would walk into a room and people would change. Nothing would irritate me more, because I want to see you in your authentic state. Remember, I'm a teacher who became a superintendent, not the other way around. And so when I enter the space, I want to see people in their natural state. And the minute people would change, I'm like, what is wrong? What's going on here? Can't we just talk about instruction, or can't we just talk about what's going on? Well, what's happened is people have become so intimidated and fearful through the hierarchy because the boss entered the room. And I'm like, can we take off this doctor title for a minute? Can we just talk about the math lesson we taught and how we can get kids from point A to point B? Like, that's what I would love to do. As a former math teacher, I love talking math. Give me numbers and, slope intercept and Pythagorean theorem and integral. Oh man, I'm like, feeling very, very excited, right? But all people wanted to talk to me about was, okay, well, what budget is this? And I'm like, okay, I realize. The other thing I would say is a huge barrier is not understanding the way systems operate and the way systemic change operates. You are not going to change what people do if you don't change how they think. You're never going to change it. You're never going to change how the resources are being distributed if you don't change the way people think about the people receiving the resources, right? Think about the way people think about our current welfare system, and I'm using air quotes, right? Must be some lazy fill in the blank of whatever, what have you, who is on this, which is not always, or I would say very seldom, the case, right? Nobody just signs up and says, yes, I want to just celebrate the fact that, I need public assistance. Most of the time, it's a place of, I'm not trying to necessarily go there. I would like to be on this as short as possible. I'm trying to keep it as quiet as I can so that I can get myself out of this situation, right? And so not shifting the way we think about people who are different is one of the biggest barriers I have with being able to do this work, and getting people willing to do that and realize that if you think different, it doesn't mean you were bad before, right? I was VP of Grant High School during a time when I know for a fact I contributed to the school to prison pipeline. I don't say that as a badge of honor. I don't say that to be proud. I'm not, trying to have that be the hashtag, right? But I know that happened because I implemented a system that, in hindsight, I can look back and go, if I would have been a little bit more knowledgeable, I would have done this differently. If I had understood the system better, I would have approached these things differently. But I did what I was taught to do, right? If a kid, gets in a fight, whoever throws the first punch, you gotta remember this, whoever throws the first punch gets 5 days. Whoever was defending themselves get 3. Some of y'all might have received that, right? That, right? Well, I know for a fact, not just because of the research that's been done, but because I've seen my babies that have been a result of that is not the correct approach to discipline. But I know I've done that, right? Being able to admit you were wrong and change and do something differently because you know it's right is a very hard thing to do. It's extremely hard to do publicly, right? That is one of the biggest barriers I see, especially, I'm just going to put it out there, especially amongst those from the dominant culture. So people who are white, male, heterosexual, Christian, middle to upper class have a very hard time with, oh my goodness, you mean you want me to admit I did something wrong? Well, we all can see it. It might be your best move right now, right? But that's part of what leadership coaching helps folks do. I'll say the last thing I'll leave with is, another big barrier is an understanding, and I'm going to use a technical term and I'll explain it, of what implementation science is. And what I mean by that is, in the research, we know that any initiative that we are trying to do is going to take 7 to 10 years to implement. Most of our plans, though, are usually 3 to 5 year plans. Mm-hmm. So literally, you plan scientifically to fail. Mm-hmm. Based on the research. Like literally, it's, you can go, NIRN, N-I-R-N, the National Institute of Research. And so what ends up happening is, because we don't understand implementation science, a lot of folks are doing way too much. They have 700 initiatives that they're trying to do at the same darn time. And, folks are kind of spinning around. They are not necessarily investing in the culture. They're thinking things are going to go faster than they are. Okay, we did that equity thing. Now let's move on to, the next thing. And I can say with all the clients that I have continued to work with personally, every single one of them has a commitment to the time it's going to take. And with every single one of them, we have had to at some point pivot from where we've wanted to go, because it's not that we're pacing at the pace of privilege. So I don't want you to think we're going slow for the white folks. Let's just be very clear. What we're talking about is going at a pace that the organization can handle. And every organization and every system, every group of people handles things differently.
That's right.
Right? And so we have to move at a pace that's actually research-based, but also is with what the group needs. Last thing I'll say is this. Big barrier is folks that think everybody's going to make it on this journey. I come in and tell folks, I guarantee you, by the time I'm done, your staffing is going to look different. They're like, what do you mean? You're going to have some folks quit. Some folks are going to leave. Some folks are going to retire. Some folks are going to choose to go somewhere else. And so what I say to that is you have to focus on the smart people that you know are worth the investment and are going to stay. Smart people usually about, the third, fourth session are going, I want to be on the right side of history, right? Like once we start making the comparisons between what we're going through right now and the civil rights movement, if y'all don't see the comparisons right now, I don't know what Ray Charles could see the comparison, right? I mean, we are the people that, if we were wondering, like, what would I have done when Martin Luther King was around? What would I have done? Well, you don't have to wonder. Go look in the mirror and see what you're doing. If you are still pacifying people who you know are not doing right by children or not shifting and changing, you might be part of the problem. If you're out there gung-ho and, maybe by yourself, you might need to come back a little bit and catch the people and bring them with you, right? And so, again, a big barrier is thinking everybody is going to make it. Everybody may not make it, and that doesn't mean that they're lost causes. They may not make it in the time that you have to spend with them right now. They may need an environment that's maybe moving a little bit slower than where you are. And so I have to say publicly, I personally do not believe in any throwaway people. I got to make sure I say that. That was my mantra as a principal, district leader, superintendent. I firmly don't believe in throwaway people. There is nobody that's worthless or useless. But this might not be your space right now. This might not be where you need to be. And that's okay, right? We got to be okay with recognizing that, we're going to move this journey and we're going to move to do what's right by kids, but everybody's not going to join us in the same time. And that sometimes hurts, but it's necessary.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Well, you teed us up for the civil rights question that I'm going to have for Professor Henderson. I want to shout out Dr. Shackelford there in our meeting and everything. So I'm shouting different people out that I see who are on the call. Thank you, brother, for joining us. So, Professor Henderson, I know you are the musician and everything, so hopefully this question is to your liking. So, during the civil rights movement, the black church, or some of us say church, specifically gospel music, undergirded the spirit of resiliency that was complementary to the movement. What are the ways in which the current gospel music can help ameliorate black leadership development?
That's a good question. First of all, music has always been at the forefront of action and protest. Okay. If you look at current music today, music and art always talks about what's happening in the world, and more people will listen to a song and remember a song than they will a session in a classroom.
Well,
if you think in terms of Glory from John Legend, you know the story by the song. If you think in terms of Stevie Wonder performing his version of Happy Birthday, you know the story because of the song.
That's right.
So music has always been at the forefront of being the creative way of teaching principles around leadership. If you look at your typical, let's say, world-class performer, they have skills that are far beyond their talent. They have communication skills, which deals with liberal arts. They have, if they have a large entourage, they have management skills, and they have something that the institution talks about that every leader has to have, is the ability to collaborate. Every great musician that deals with large ensembles, all of my learning primarily, and Dr. Shelley can tell you, in my earlier years, I threw these enormously large events. I spoke to audiences, I raised money, I managed students, I developed all of the skills that I normally would have had to enroll in a class from simply having performing arts. So the black church itself, in terms of how we look at civil rights and the black church in terms of how gospel music today is much more eclectic, meaning that gospel music today is not based around just religious views. Gospel music today now sort of mixes hip hop and reggae and R&B and soul. But music has always, the one thing is just that as individuals progress, people have always been in protest to the earlier group of individuals. And so if you think in terms of music, in terms of protest, music in terms of leadership, you can't learn more in terms about leadership, which deals with ethics, which deals with communication, which deals with sensitivity. I have had so many different artists and celebrities that I've had to deal with. And you know what? I can talk to someone and I can always detect their emotion. Because one of the greatest things that a leader has to do is to be able to feel what is not said.
Discernment.
And to be able to have a sense of, I would say, wisdom. To be able to, not only to develop wisdom, to understand how to deal with people. To understand, I'm gonna give you a good example. Someone, years ago, someone said to me, I needed to get around $10,000 from this president. Now, the normal policy was that you had to apply for these particular funds. But I didn't want to apply for the funds because I had already applied for the funds. I needed $10,000 more in order to put this a big event on. So the president was walking down the hall and he was telling me how grateful he was for this community event, because at UC Berkeley I created something called the Gospel Experience, and that was where we would attract 1,500 to 2,000 people from all over the Bay Area that would come in to support these groups that Dr. Shelley was a part of. And at the community college I created this community sequel called the Gospel Celebration. That's where I would bring always a mega star to the campus, and the students would pretty much they would demonstrate all of their learning outcomes through their fine musical pedagogy. But I needed more money. I just needed more money because I had, it was about an $80,000 project and I needed more money. So what I did was I listened carefully at some of the language that the president would use when talking to the faculty. And I tried to figure out, now how can I show how what I'm doing meets the mission of the administrator? That's exactly what I did. So I didn't write a proposal. I didn't do it the formal way. I said, Dr. President Garcia, how do you feel about giving me $10,000 more? He said, why should I? I said, because you talked about the fact that you want to engage the community more. I said, there is no other program in this whole district that engages every aspect of the community except this celebration. You know what he said? He said, call the office, you got the money. Because the reality was, I had to find a way to get my point across, but I had to find my way of getting my point across, which is effective leadership and leading. I had to lead the president to my bottom line mission, but I had to do it in such a way that I respected the rules that he had implemented for the institution. And so to me, that's because I look at an institution, I always say that a college is a faith community minus theology. Because if you think in terms of a good faith community, the goal of a faith community minus theology is to improve the life of individuals while they're here on earth. Think about that part. And the goal of a college is to do what? to improve the life of individuals while they're here on earth and to give them skills. So how can a big pastor or a leader or a synagogue leader, how can a synagogue leader talk to the poor person, the white person, the black person, the straight person, the gay person, the LGBTQ person, the Latino person? How can you talk to all these different people and still have a common goal? You have to have a good skill in the uses of language. Language to me is the key for success when it comes to not only instruction, but when it comes to leadership. Gospel artists that are very successful and work not only just in the faith-based community now, but they work on concert stages, you will always find that they have a great acumen in terms of their leadership skills, because they're able to address crowds of people. They're able to talk to crowds of people. Because think about it, very well-known artists, they will deal with poor people, they will have interviews, they deal with faith communities, they deal with political communities, they deal with club owners, they deal with theatrical shows, they deal with every aspect of the community, where typically a person who teaches, let's say in a classroom, they're dealing just with one sort of clientele. But in my profession, I've dealt with almost every single type, and people ask me all the time, how was this man a choral instructor and have all this impact? It's because I never look at myself as a choral instructor. I looked at myself as an institution. It just so happens to be music is what I do. And so that's where I learned leadership. That's where I learned public speaking. That's where I learned to perform. So I use my audiences as a way of teaching not only equitable principles, but teaching fairness and teaching inclusion. I use the music as a way of showing discipline and excellence. I use my music as a way of pulling people together. I use my music as a way of understanding how do I create one goal for the students, but actually meet all the different cultural concerns within a sort of an instructional context. And so to me, the goal of gospel music today, which is actually very wonderful, it has broadened itself out to the point that it absolutely represents the mission of the civil rights struggle and the civil rights mission, which is to support the equality of all. And so that goes back to my belief that great learning, great civil rights, great advocacy supports intellectual equity.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Professor Henderson. All right, we're getting close. So let me go to Dr. Coakley. So again, this is my copy. So what was the motivation for your book? This is mine. Also, how do you balance your superintendency with your other ventures and your personal life?
All right, good question. What motivated the book was, first I was just journaling and just kind of writing about my experiences in K-12, reflecting back on my K-12 education as a student in Oregon, and then some of my elementary and high school experiences. And then I started writing about my parents and sort of what they meant to me as a student, looking up to them as leaders. And then I started just really reflecting on my K-12 journey, and what I found was that every single journaling was about a specific person who helped me get to the seat that I'm currently at today. And so then I started thinking, I need to write a book to really give people their flowers while they can still smell them. And so I think that teachers do so many great things and they impact so many people, and then we go on about our lives and they don't really know what they meant to us unless we really tell them. And so I've been real intentional about every time I talk to a group asking people to reflect over your K-12 journey and think about the people who really impacted you. And if they're still alive, reach out to them and let them know what they mean to you and give them their flowers while they can still smell them. And so one of the reasons that started to stick with me was because as I was writing this book, during the pandemic, something unexpected happened, which was my dad passed. My dad is on the cover. He was a retired principal. That's him right there. That's my mom. And there's me when I was in kindergarten. And so my dad was like my rock. He was, as a superintendent's jobs can be really isolating at times. I mean, we meet with people all the time, but to me, to really like be myself and be vulnerable and talk to people about like different things I'm going through, you gotta have a relationship there. And so me and my dad would talk all the time. And it wasn't due to COVID or anything like that. Just I would talk to him in the morning, one morning, and I had written the first chapter. He read it. He gave me feedback on the first chapter because the first chapter is about him and my mom growing up in the South. And I was born in Tennessee and then moved out to Oregon when I was 5 years old. So I wanted to make sure the chapter was accurate. So he read the first chapter. And then one morning I talked to him and I go, hey, what's going on? He goes, it's 5 in the morning because we're both real early risers. And I'll talk about that in a second. But he was retired. I had a job, so I'm up. He called me at 5. I go, what are you doing up at 5? And he goes, I'm watering the flowers. And I said, why are you watering the flowers at 5? And he goes, I want to get him over before your mom wakes up. Because if I don't, then she wakes up and then she supervises me and tells me how to water them. So I just want to tell her I already did it. And so I said, okay. Then he goes, yeah, what's your day looking like? So I told him what my day was looking like. And then later on that day, I missed a call from my mom, which I was at work and I looked and saw I had a missed call and somebody was talking to me in the office. Then I missed another call and then my brother lives in New York. He called me, my younger brother. And I was like, hey, this might be an emergency. There's 3 calls in a row. So I called my brother back. His wife answered and said, hey, your dad had a heart attack. Rush, get over to your mom. So I lost him. He was 67. It was during the pandemic. And he was one of the main reasons I was writing the book. And then there's so many other people that are of his generation, his age, that really impacted me that I was also writing about. So I started to think, because it took me 2 years. It was a 2-year process. And so I started thinking, if I don't finish this book, some of the people that I'm trying to give these flowers to aren't going to be here. And so my job, superintendent job could be nonstop. But I started to really, to the second part of your question, I started to really focus on work-life balance. And now I teach people about work-life balance and how to maintain work-life balance as an educator and a school leader, because teachers are workaholics. And we get an email at night, we respond to it. Get an email in the morning, we respond to it. If somebody calls you, you're going to give them help. If somebody asks you to teach a class, you do it. Some student says, hey, I need extra time, you do it. And so how do you find that work-life balance? And I'm a single dad. And so for me, when I was a principal, one day my son, who was 5 years old at the time, no, he was a little older than that, 5th grade at the time, he said, hey, Dad, what's your weekend looking like? And I was like, I don't know, why? And he goes, I want to know if I could schedule some time with you. And when he said that to me, I was like, man, I work way too much. Like, I don't want you to have to schedule time with me. I'm just going to, I'm not going to respond to email. I'm not going to do any of this stuff. And then from there, as a principal, I started being real intentional about work-life balance. So I have a bunch of strategies on how to do it. But the way that I wrote this book, as a superintendent, working and doing everything that the job entails, is I started to, probably 2 years ago, set my alarm at 4:30 a.m. And then I'm a snooze person and I'm not a morning person, so I'd always hit the snooze. But eventually, I started waking up at 5. I'd set it at 4:30, I'd snooze it, and then I'd wake up at 5. But then what I realized was I liked it, because waking up at 5, the house was quiet, my kids were asleep, there wasn't emails to respond to. So then I started to say, this is the best time that I can get goals done. And I'm not talking about my work goal, I'm talking about my personal goals. So if you have personal goals, I started saying, I'm gonna write for 30 minutes a day. Started to do it. And once I started to write for 30 minutes a day, then I started really getting into it, then it would be an hour. But if anybody takes a goal that you have, it doesn't have to be in the AM, it doesn't have to be at 5. But if you carve out 30 minutes a day and you do it for 30 days, that's 900 minutes towards your goal. And you will accomplish something that you want to, and then you can move to the next thing. And so after I lost my dad, some things that some people don't know about me is I lost 70 pounds on purpose. I gained muscle. I was overweight. My dad was overweight. He had the heart attack. And I was like, I got to make some changes because he died at 67. I'm going down the same exact path. My kids are young. I've got to make some changes. So I started doing all this research on eating healthy and exercise and workout routine. And in the morning, I started writing. Then I started doing cardio. Then I write and do cardio. Write and do cardio. Then my kids wake up. I get them to school. Then I start my job. And I started telling people, being real transparent about my boundaries. And telling my secretary I don't have meetings before 9 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, I start doing email. I do emails from 8 to 9. My first meeting has to be after 9. At this point in time, after 3 p.m., I'm cutting that off, and then I'm stopping email at a specific time. And I stayed with that. Then it started to be this huge, expansive routine in the morning where now I go to the gym at 5, I do cardio, I'm reading books, I'm doing different things that are specific to my goals. But I'm also being really transparent about sharing that with leaders, because these are burnout jobs and you gotta set boundaries. You gotta learn what your parameters are. You gotta tell people no sometimes. And you also have to make sure that you're happy with what you're doing. And if you have goals that you want that are outside of just work hours, make the time for them. Because the most important thing in life that nobody can get back, it's not money, it's time.
Yes.
That's right.
I would give everything to have one more day back with my dad, but that won't happen. But my son probably feels the same way. So I can't just work until he goes off to college. He's a freshman right now. We spend a lot of time together, and also he has his routines. When I'm doing work at home, he's doing homework, and then I'll say, okay, we're gonna end it at this time. We're gonna have dinner together, then we're gonna play some basketball, or so, whatever we want to do. But we have to be really intentional about it, because you're not gonna get the time back. So that's what the book is about. It's about reflecting on people who helped me in my K-12 journey and giving them their flowers. And it's for anybody, but there's lessons for leaders in the back. But it's mostly stories. It's my narrative or counter narrative to K-12 as a black student in Oregon and how I got there. And I brought a bunch of them, so if anybody wants them, they're $18, but I will sign them, and I did it independent. If it was a big book company, I'd just give them out, but I didn't want to do that, because then they take away my story, and it was like a 360 deal, where they take everything that you put into it, and you get nothing back for your own book. So I did it all by myself, and I put up my own money, and so I did it that way. But it is also on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. I brought about 15 to 20 books. So thank you guys.
All right, thank you for that. But I do want to get some questions, but I'll give Dr. Clark his last difficult question. So it's kind of like a follow-up to the second question I have for you. So, have you experienced any pushback against your equity efforts? If so, what are in what ways? And what is your advice to like up-and-coming superintendents or people who wish to duplicate some of your district's equity strategies?
Yeah, so that's a great question. What I will say is I've received limited pushback, but there's a reason why. It's been very intentional. As a superintendent, I have over 30 years in public education and working with young people, and like I said before, I've worked in all different levels. And when you become a superintendent, your bosses are now 5 or 7 elected people that may be pros at anything but education. And so a lot of superintendents have to kind of eat this humble pie and realize that their only way to success is really working with their board and really understanding their board and having their board understand them and what's going on in the district. So the reason why we've been able to do a lot of equity work in Mount Diablo with very limited pushback is because I spend so much time talking with each board member about their values, about what they want to get out of serving as a board member, about things that they see in the district, things that worked with their kids. Some of their kids are already out of the system, some of their kids are in the system, but really being able to talk to them and then align our equity work with our district mission and vision. And so before every meeting, I go over our 4 goals within the district. Before every board meeting, I highlight those. Before every principal meeting, I highlight those. So I make sure that all of my actions are just doing the work that the district has committed to do. And so it's not, oh, this is Dr. Clark's plan, or this is his thing that he's trying to push on us. I just don't want us to be hypocrites. Mm-hmm. If we say we're going to do something, then let's do it. And if you look at our data, which is similar to pretty much any data that you look at in California or in the nation, it's very predictable on what student groups are going to do what, on who's achieving, on who's not achieving, and things like that. And so we're not living up to our mission when we say we're going to prepare all kids for college and career if I have large segments of my population who's graduating without meeting A to G requirements.
That's right.
Or who's not graduating, or students who do make it into college but then leave after one semester or 1 year or whatnot. And so really what my job is, and Dr. Shelley Holt helps with this, is I'm very clear with my expectations. I want to make sure that young people who go through our system, when they look back on it, that they're going to be able to say it was a positive experience. Not I hated school, or I built all this wealth, but I did it in spite of what my schools did, or in spite of what they said to me and things like that. So I just want to hold our organization accountable. And one way of doing that is through equity. But like the way I was raised on equity. I was raised that you accept people for who they are, that you put your best foot forward, you work hard, but you understand that you have privileges and opportunities. We all have privileges living in this country. Because there's other countries where we don't have those, and I'm not one who's traveled a lot around the world, but I read a lot, I watch a lot, and I can see in some parts of the world, like it is a struggle just to get up each and every day, or just to be yourself. And so we have a lot of opportunities in this country, and so I just want to make sure that that we're able to truly live up to what we say we're going to do. But getting that relationship with the board as a superintendent, like that is critical. And I think a lot of superintendents fall short of that. And some of the reasons why there aren't more people of color or people of different backgrounds in the dominant culture is because boards need to feel comfortable with who they're hiring. And if we ourselves are not comfortable with being with people who are different, then we're going to have trouble. My board, I have 5 board members, and then I have 1 student board member. They're all females. So right there's different. I'm not a female, and so I have to work with them with that lens of knowing that they're coming from a different place just because of our gender. Now, our race is different, our age is different in some ways, but I spend time talking about those things that are important to them, and then that's how we can get to that place to where we can put equity in. I'll say this: before, when I came into Mount Diablo and we were working around equity, we were basically training our principals to get in front of their staffs and then bring up the topics of implicit bias and opportunity and white privilege and things like that, and they weren't ready for that. That's basically doing advanced placement work on a very elementary skill set. And so I kind of got away from that, and I kind of said, you know what? you as the leaders, you're going to be responsible for making sure that, number one, every one of our kids feels welcome at our schools, and that we are doing what we say we're going to do. So that means if it's a second grade class and we walk into that class, there's second grade curriculum being taught to all students, right? There's the standards are universal across the board. Like, everyone's going to get standards. Everyone's going to have their parents met with. Everyone's going to get that same experience. And so that's how I hold people accountable. I don't have to yell and shout and use position power, because people often think, well, you're the superintendent, just tell them. Let me tell you, I learned this when I was a second grade teacher. Because I told those kids to do something, they didn't do it. I had to find other ways to get them to do things. So I got to find other ways to motivate adults on really caring for our young people. And it's you know, it has to be very strategic, but it really starts at that board. And then just on the final thing I'll say, like, again, I haven't met him before, but just my alarm goes off at 4:15 every morning. I snooze it until 5. And I ride the Peloton bike, and then I read the paper, and it's just my time. But we all got to find balance in what we do. And then my last message, just because we got some young people in the room, young people, you're going to work for the rest of your lives, and so you need to make sure that you find some line of work that you enjoy, and that you get something out of more than just money, because money is just a thing. Things like time, things like balance, things like making an impact on people, and the more education you have, the more choices you have in what that's going to be. So with that, I'll yield my time, but thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. So we are overtime, and Randy, don't kill me, but people that came here in particular, the audience, in-person audience, just maybe 3 questions and everything, because again, I know it's important. So just bear with me, tech crew and everybody. So if you have questions for our panel, please, a question. Don't go into, how some of us do. Like, we have this long statement and give their biography. No, just a question for our panel. Yes, August.
I'm gonna try to make okay, I have a question for you. So when you're basically interviewing teachers that are probably not pushing equity, or act as if they're pushing equity, and internally have their own biases, how do you deal with that? How do you pull that out of them and actually be able to recognize that within them, so they don't actually end up basically, not giving the right attention or type of teaching to a minority, it's a child that's part of the minority group?
Well, thank you for asking that, first of all. I appreciate it. And I think anybody could have responded to that. But I think one of the biggest things, and we've all kind of touched on it, is you have to make people feel safe. And sometimes that's hard, especially if, I'm just going to put it out there, if you're talking to someone who is of the dominant culture, which we know racially is white, and you know that they're causing harm, let's say to someone who looks like you. That can be very personal, right? Because everybody, y'all my babies. And that can be very difficult, but at the same time, that person knows that something's up. If they've gotten in front of you and they're in the space, most of the time they know something's up. And so you want to create an environment where they don't feel judged, they don't feel shame, they don't feel like you're going to, do the mama finger or something at them. And you get to talking. And one of the best ways, first of all, we set some ground rules of how we're going to discuss. So I use, if you've ever heard of Don Miguel Ruiz, he has a book called The 4 Agreements. Mm-hmm. And that is I actually give it to each of my kids when they turn 13, my own personal children, because it helps them to understand how they need to show up and the feelings and emotions they're going to go through. So I tell people, at some point in here, you're going to have something that I'm saying is something you're not supposed to do, and you've done that thing. The biggest thing right now is color blindness. They'll say, oh, I'm colorblind. And I'm like, stop that, because that's telling me you don't see me, mm-hmm. right? You're not seeing what I bring to the table. And what you're also saying is, seeing you is causing me enough inconvenience that I don't want to do, so I'm just going to pretend I don't see you, right? And so when people hear that message, they go, ooh, okay. But you have to set them up to say, it's okay. We're gonna Maya Angelou this bad boy. When we know better, we do better. That's what Auntie Maya said. Everybody knows Auntie Maya, right? And so you see how like immediately you bring down the affective filters, you're getting people in this space, we start telling stories. So I do share that story of I'm a black woman and I have done things that are racially insensitive. Now, who else has done things, right? And so when you as the leader in that space are vulnerable and you admit, like, yeah, I've done this, it gives everybody else permission to go, oh, and I say, okay, the roof didn't come down, God didn't strike me dead. I admitted that I have made a mistake in my past and it may have harmed people. And that is a very hard thing to do, and that's something that we're going to struggle with. Everybody's going to get there in their own time. So you give people permission and space to admit what's going on, and then we give strategies to correct it. So we're not just going to leave you in that space of you messed up, but now what are the protocols, whether it's restorative practices we need to use, whether we need to increase your pedagogy, whether we need to expand your horizons, whether we need you to understand the people you're working with and their differences. Because that's often part of it is they're expecting the children or the student or whoever to assimilate to them. And what I tell people is no. As a leader, when you took the job of being a teacher or a leader, you said, I want to teach children. You did not sign up to teach the children that all know how to read and all know this and all that. That wasn't part of the job description, right? And so we bring people back into that space. And what it does, once people start to feel like, oh, she's not going to judge me, I'm not going to get in trouble, it's amazing how much they'll start to open up and try new things. Because it is still, like medicine, education is a little bit of a practice. I got to see what works before I figure out what fits you. Does that help?
Yes, that answered it perfectly. Thank you.
Anybody over here?
Yeah. Okay. So, I've been trying to frame this in my head. Tupac is famous for saying that he's a rose that grew through concrete.
Yes.
Okay? You guys have talked a lot about how to remove the concrete. My question is, what strategies have you guys identified that works to prevent people paving concrete?
Good question. That's a good question.
Because if I'm supposed to grow a rose enriched loam, and you guys have talked about how to enrich the soil, how do you help people who they don't want to live in the natural world, they want to live in a concrete jungle? So there's supposed to be a sidewalk there, not a garden.
Anybody?
I actually used that quote in my one of my opening day superintendent's messages from Tupac. And the thing is we have to get, so for me as a superintendent, my job is to get the right people on the bus in the right seat. But also, I think someone down on the panel said, start with the leaders. And so my second year at the current job I'm in at MESD, it was just leaders, a room of leaders. And I basically said, so my first year, I listened, built relationships, figured out what the organization is about. And then now I'm going to talk to you about the barriers. And one of the biggest barriers is that we have leaders right here in this room that are on the wrong bus and they're in the wrong seat. And I'm driving the bus now. That doesn't mean that you can't be in education, but you can't be in education in this system because you are creating barriers and you're on the wrong bus. So ring the bell and I'll let you off at the next stop. Because kids need us. They need teachers that believe in them. They need educators that believe in them. My job isn't to change adults' belief systems and then give them all the skills so they can give students what they need. I need to hire people who are going to give students what they need. See what I'm saying? So in my seat, that's what it means to me. And I really appreciate the question too.
I want to add to that because I appreciate that comment, but I want to say something that kind of goes back to what Dr. Shelley was saying, is that I think it's also starting from the standpoint that things are racially charged, not always being racially intended. And that something that is racially charged is unintentional. Is that a lot of times people people say and do things, take the approach that people say and do things because they don't know. And so through a sense of inquiry, as that person is developing more skill to be more sensitive to a larger group or a specific group, talk to whomever as the leader from the standpoint that it's racially charged but it's not racially intended. Because then that way, the professional feels many times that you're not attacking them, but you are allowing them the space to use their mind and their intellect to develop inquiry about perhaps looking at something different. It's like when someone says to you, I don't like the way you do something. The first thing a person's gonna do, if they've been doing it forever, because as you're trying to get more teachers involved, you have to also recognize those who are still current and those who are, as Dr. Shelley say, are protected by tenure. How do you support that? Okay, and we had a big debate about that. So how do you encourage teachers that are already in the system? They're gonna be there, they're not going anywhere. How do you encourage them to perhaps consider? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to approach them not like they're bad boy, bad girl. You have to approach them in a sense where I'm just sharing something with you and I'm wondering if you would consider. I find when I worked as a dean especially, and even as a leader all throughout the state of California in higher education, I find that that was a much better approach and that people most of the time would listen. When I was on the state senate, I traveled all over California. Every week, that's all we did, was stay on and off the airplane. And I would talk to different legislators all the time, and other educators all the time. And when we wanted to talk about how to teach people to create an equitable curriculum, we had to first of all not say, your course is whitewashed. You have to find a way to say it in such a way that you create a dialogue and allow the other person to say, you know what, I'm gonna consider such and such. So I just thought
Okay, let's get one more in because we're. Oh, yes.
I got one last question for. I don't know your name. The one right next to you.
Me.
Yes, you.
Dr. Coakley.
Dr. what?
Coakley.
Coakley? Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Coakley, there was a conversation about comfortability, right? Comfortability in being black. Now, I understand that, but as 3% of the population, what type of comfortability is there, if there's even any hope or anticipation of that in the mind? And two, like, how, that's more of a personal question. How do I feel comfortable in my own skin in a place I'm not supposed to be at? Or I'm supposed to be at, but I'm supposed to change, right? But I know that there's only so much. There's a limitation to that mixing pot. How much can that really be diverse? So how am I supposed to cope with that in my head? How am I supposed to accept that? How am I supposed to settle that in my head? Or is it just supposed to be some unsettling journey I walk on until I die?
True.
That's a deep question. And what I would say is, I understand exactly what you're talking about. And so, you have to first find the job that actually, where you can be yourself and you don't have to change. And for me, that was Martin Luther King Elementary when I was a teacher. I think when I got my teaching license, most people get their teaching license and then they put it in HR and then they have an opportunity to go to any school in the district. But for me, I specifically knew that there was a principal there that trusted me. I could be myself. There were staff members there that trusted me that I could be myself. I just had to be really intentional about where I was gonna go and then kind of get my footing. And then once I had that, then what opened up doors for me was actually the papers, the degrees. So I had my master's degree in teaching, But a leader told me, he said, hey, so read your contract, because if you do read it, you'll find that they pay for classes if you're in a doctoral program. And people could actually get a doctorate completely paid for while you're teaching, but no one ever takes advantage of it. And I was like, well, I'm gonna take advantage of it. So I went through the doctoral program while I was teaching kids at King. It was students that looked like me, parents that looked like me, a community where I felt like I could be successful. And then when I got the doctorate, it opened up doors that I probably would have never been able to be in spaces. And then it led me to this seat. And now I'm trying to create a district where our staff members can be themselves. And it's not we don't expect everybody to have the skills, because that's what our job is as leaders, is to provide the skills for people to be successful in their roles, but also not just their roles, but actually, what is your goal? What do you want to do? Because people get in these things where they're in a role and they're in it for 30 years. My mom, she was a kindergarten teacher for 30 years, and she was great. But to me, I keep changing. That's why the book is called Reason for Every Season, because one season ends and then it's a new season and I'm ready to do something else. And so I want to find out actually what people want to do and help them get to their goals, because what's the use of doing a job if it's repetitive, you're unhappy with it, or it's just not what you want to do.
Not what they need.
Yeah, so just trying to meet people where they are. Yeah, to that question, I would say find your tribe and start there.
So do you focus on like visualizing? Like, do you need to visualize your success before you do it? Meaning you have to see it. It can't just be on paper. That's more of a personal question, but
yeah, for me, I have to do both. So I do a lot of writing and just jotting down like ideas, and then I'm really into like music, so listening to music and going on walks and kind of just thinking about what I want to do. But then I'm real visual too, so I have to outline what my calendar is going to be and when I'm going to do certain things.
I see. Okay.
I just wanted to just say one thing, is that, we all on the outside, we all can look a certain way or have a certain persona about us, and people make judgments by how we look all the time. But who you are and how you show up and what you are known for, that's going to go further than what they see on the outside. And I'll just real quickly, just my message is to folks, every job that I've gotten in education has come from somebody that I knew, who I worked with, or who knew of the work that I do. Yep. And so that overcame, that's why I was able to go and be the first black principal at a particular school, or be the only black employee in a particular district. So like, whatever it is, you show up on time, you're positive, you pay attention to detail, you always finish something, you're a person of your word. Those things really matter than the exterior, how you dress, what you look like, what your hair looks like, those things. Because people are gonna assume things about you, but then who you are each and every day, that's what's gonna leave that lasting impression. So again, just great question, and I know it's a struggle sometimes to be in spaces where we're one of few, but really when you peel that away, we all are just who we are. And I run into things sometimes, if I hire a person just on what image they've projected, almost 9 times out of 10 I'm always wrong on that. Because I can't look at you and just because you look a certain way, put you in a particular box, positive, negative, whatever. But if I do my research on you and I really check those references on you and find out what you're really about, that's what I'm gonna hire rather than the exterior. So
absolutely.
All right. I just have to add one thing to that, because you mentioned the piece about having to navigate in white spaces, and all of us have had to do that in some way. And so I don't want to leave this with you thinking that all of that being said, we still have to figure out how to navigate in spaces when you're the only one, no matter what that is. And so oftentimes our only one may be our skin color, maybe your gender, it may be, but you've got to learn how to operate in those spaces. And the best ways to learn that, I'm going to tell you two things. One, you've got to know yourself. Know who you are and know yourself at different 18-year-old me when I was in Professor Henderson's class is very different than 25-year-old me sitting here today. Shut up. Don't nobody do know that. Right? But no, it's been a few more years. but I'm still me. Right? I'm still me. Right? I may not have the Adidas and the hip hop hat still on back from when I was there, but the fighter in me is still here. What you learn over time is how to refine who that is. And so you're going to learn and grow it. So you've got to get comfortable with who you are so that when you're in certain spaces, you can flip the switch in a heartbeat and be like, okay, I got to be Dr. Holt in this situation. Oh, I can be Shelley here. Oh, it's just me and Adam sitting there talking. Oh, okay, well, we can sit back and have a chit chat. You've got to learn how to navigate that. And that's part of what your college degree is telling you. Yes, you're learning information, but you're also learning for yourself how to navigate in these spaces while not losing who you are. And that's your job. That's nobody else's job but you. Does that make sense? All right.
So give it up for our panel. I just want to thank my colleagues, Paula, for organizing. My colleagues are here. Garcia, Avery, my rehab mentors are in the house. Shout out to them and everybody here on Zoom. Darian, thank you, brother, for coming out. So we are overtime, and again, I'm gonna have to make Randy some bread or have my wife do it. So thank you all. You don't have to go home, but you know what? You gotta get out of here. All right.